All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be back.
Today, we're diving into something pretty complex and honestly a bit concerning. The situation in Ukraine, the international players involved, and, well, let's just say there have been some pretty interesting developments.
Yes, interesting is one word for it. It's a tangled web we're about to unravel.
So, to set the stage, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Trump has been in direct communication with Putin about the war in Ukraine.
And that's not through official channels or anything. It's happening outside of the usual diplomatic channels.
Yeah, it's what some call back channeling, right?
Exactly. And it's usually reserved for, well, sensitive topics. Let's just say it raises eyebrows.
Definitely raises eyebrows.
Yeah.
Especially because there have been these reports of Putin making late-night visits to the Kremlin, fueling the speculation that these visits might be timed to coincide with Trump's schedule in the U.S.
Given the time difference, yeah, it makes you wonder.
It's a bit suspicious, right?
To say the least.
Yeah.
It all adds to the intrigue.
Especially when you consider that Trump has admitted to these conversations with Putin, but he won't say how often they're talking.
Exactly. That lack of transparency is a bit troubling.
I mean, he keeps saying that he's always had this good relationship with Putin.
Right, which is important to remember that personal connection could be influencing his approach to this whole situation.
And he's been pretty vocal about having a plan to stop the war. Claims he can end it quickly.
A bold claim. We'll have to wait and see what this plan actually entails.
Okay, so we've got Trump and Putin talking in the shadows. Now let's bring Zalinsky into the picture.
Right, the man in the middle of all this.
He's been busy showcasing Ukraine's natural resources to Western journalists, talking about lithium, uranium, titanium, claiming they're worth trillions.
It's a smart move, strategically speaking. He's trying to attract foreign investment, highlighting the potential economic benefits of supporting Ukraine.
And he's not just showing off these resources, he's actively offering them up for sale to Western partners, specifically those who have, quote unquote, protected Ukraine.
He's basically saying, look, we have these valuable resources, and those who help us should benefit from them.
And he seems to be emphasizing the U.S. as a key partner here, implying they deserve the lion's share.
Right. He's definitely sending a clear message to the U.S., strengthening that alliance, making them feel like a priority.
Okay, so now this is where things get really interesting. It seems Trump has offered Zelensky a deal, $500 million, in exchange for access to those resources. And of course, security guarantees in any future peace agreement.
It's a bold move, reframing the aid given to Ukraine as an investment, essentially.
Like a loan to be repaid with access to those potentially lucrative resources.
Exactly. It raises some big questions about who ultimately controls and benefits from Ukraine's resources.
And, some people are saying that $500 million is a lowball offer, just a starting point for negotiations.
It wouldn't be surprising, right? It's a classic negotiating tactic. Start low and see where it goes.
But there's also this underlying sense of urgency. One author I read suggested Zelensky might be forced to accept, just for his own safety and his political future.
Yeah, he's under immense pressure. His life's on the line, really.
And just to add another layer of complexity to all of this, there's speculation that any extraction of these resources would likely involve Russia as a partner.
Which makes sense, given their control over some of those resource-rich territories.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, how would that even work given the current state of things?
It's like trying to mix oil and water.
It's a recipe for disaster, potentially. But hey, stranger things have happened.
Stranger things indeed. All right, well, we've laid out the key players and the tangled web they're caught in. It's a lot to unpack, and we're just getting started.
Buckle up, folks. This deep dive is about to get even more interesting.
Okay, so we've got this potential deal on the table. Let's break it down from each player's perspective, shall we? Starting with Ukraine. What's in it for them?
Well, on the surface, it seems like a lifeline, right? $500 million could go a long way in rebuilding their infrastructure, their economy. It's a much-needed infusion of cash.
But I imagine it's not that simple.
Of course not. There are always strings attached, especially when you're dealing with geopolitical power plays.
Like what? What are some of the potential downsides for Ukraine?
Well, for starters, they risk becoming overly dependent on the U.S., which, could compromise their long-term autonomy and decision-making ability.
They're trading their resources for immediate assistance, but it could come at the cost of their independence down the line.
Exactly. It's a classic dilemma for countries in vulnerable positions. Do you prioritize short-term survival or long-term self-determination?
Tough choices.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the U.S. What's their angle in all of this?
Well, from a purely strategic standpoint, this deal is a gold mine. They get access to these critical minerals, which are essential for pretty much every industry you can think of, technology, defense, you name it.
So it's not just about helping out Ukraine. There's a clear economic incentive for the U.S. to get involved.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just about the economic gains either. This also gives the U.S. a chance to strengthen its geopolitical influence in the region right on Russia's doorstep.
A little power play, perhaps.
You could say that. But of course, there are risks involved too. The U.S. could be accused of exploiting Ukraine's vulnerability, essentially buying them out at a bargain price.
Yeah, that's not a good look. And what about the potential silo-out with their European allies?
That's another big concern. European nations might view this as the U.S. acting unilaterally, pursuing its own interests without considering the broader implications.
So there's a chance of creating a rift within NATO, which wouldn't be good for anyone.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act for the U.S. They need to weigh the potential benefits against the risks of alienating their allies and further escalating tensions with Russia.
Okay, speaking of Russia, how do you think they're viewing this whole situation?
I imagine they're not thrilled about it, to say the least. They've already invested heavily in this conflict, and they're not going to back down without a fight.
So what are their options?
Well, they could try to sabotage the deal somehow, make things difficult for the U.S. and Ukraine, or they could play the long game, wait for the right moment to make their move.
So they're in a bit of a bind, too.
Definitely. They need to balance their geopolitical ambitions with the realities on the ground. And let's not forget about the internal political dynamics Putin has an image to maintain.
He can't appear weak, especially not on the world stage.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes game of chess, and every move has consequences.
It's all so complicated, and it's easy to get caught up in the political maneuvering and the economic interest. But we can't forget that there are real people at the heart of all of this.
Absolutely. The human cost of this conflict is immeasurable. Lives lost, families torn apart, a whole generation traumatized.
It's heartbreaking. And we can't lose sight of that amidst all the geopolitical strategizing.
We have to remember that these are not just abstract concepts we're talking about. These are real people with real lives, and their future hangs in the balance.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, even if this deal goes through, will it actually bring about a lasting peace?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Will this be a genuine step towards reconciliation and stability, or just a temporary bandage on a deep wound?
And who will ultimately benefit from this deal? The Ukrainian people? Or just the powerful players pulling the strings?
These are complex questions with no easy answers, but they're questions we need to keep asking. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep demanding accountability from those in power.
It feels like we're standing at the edge of a precipice here. The choices made now could have a ripple effect for years, even decades to come.
Absolutely. And as we try to make sense of what might happen next, I think it's crucial to step back and look at the bigger picture, the historical context.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Ukraine has been caught in this geopolitical tug of war between Russia and the West for centuries.
Right. It's a strategically important country, and its history is deeply intertwined with both.
Exactly. And understanding that history is key to understanding the current situation. It sheds light on why Russia sees Ukraine as so vital to its interests, and why the West is so determined to support Ukraine's independence.
Okay, so let's talk history. What are some of the key events that have led us to this point?
Well, you could argue that the roots of this conflict go back centuries. But for our purposes, I think a good place to start is with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991.
That makes sense. A major turning point for the entire region.
Absolutely. And for Ukraine, it meant independence. But it also meant inheriting a complex legacy. A large Russian-speaking population, a shared border with Russia, and a web of economic and political ties that were difficult to break.
So even though they were independent on paper, they were still very much entangled with Russia.
Precisely. And those ties became a major source of tension. Russia saw Ukraine's independence as a threat to its own security, to its sphere of influence.
And the West saw an opportunity to expand its influence eastward.
Exactly. It became a geopolitical chess match, with both sides vying for control over Ukraine.
And then, of course, came 2014 and the annexation of Crimea.
A major turning point. It shattered any illusion of stability and showed the world that Russia was willing to use military force to get what it wanted.
It was a wake-up call for the international community.
Absolutely. And it laid the groundwork for the full-scale invasion we're seeing today.
So in a way, the current war is a continuation of that earlier conflict.
Precisely. It's all connected. And that's why understanding the historical context is so crucial.
Okay, so knowing all of that, how does it help us understand what might happen next?
Well, it suggests that Russia isn't going to back down easily. They see Ukraine as a core part of their historical and strategic sphere of influence.
So a negotiated settlement that involves Russia giving up control of Ukrainian territory seems unlikely.
It's a tough road, for sure. But history is full of surprises. The outcome will depend on a lot of factors: military strength, economic pressure, diplomatic efforts, and perhaps most importantly, the will of the Ukrainian people.
Their resilience has been truly remarkable. They're determined to defend their country, their freedom.
Absolutely. And that spirit, combined with the support of the international community, gives me hope. Hope that a just and lasting peace is still possible.
It's a long road ahead, but we have to keep pushing for that peace. Keep the pressure on, keep raising our voices.
I agree. We can't afford to become complacent. The world is watching. And the decisions made today will shape the future of Ukraine and the global order for years to come.
It's a heavy responsibility,
Yeah.
but it's one we all share. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep demanding better from our leaders.
Well said. This deep dive has been a journey, hasn't it? We've explored the complexities of this conflict, delved into the historical context, and tried to make sense of the forces at play.
It's been eye-opening and, honestly, a bit overwhelming at times.
I understand these are complex issues, but it's important that we engage with them, that we try to understand what's happening in the world around us.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly, and that's what we're here for, to empower you with the knowledge and understanding you need to make informed decisions and contribute to a better world.
Well said. And on that, though, we'll leave you with this thought. The situation in Ukraine is far from over. The game is still being played. But the future is not yet written. It's up to all of us to shape it, to demand peace, justice, and a world where the voices of the people are heard. Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear,